The Speedy World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali, and you are watching Fault Lines. Iran has a strike in the northern city of Iraq, in the city of Erbil, where some targets have been locked and engaged with the use of missiles. This was initially claimed by some international independent media, but later on accepted through an official communication by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, who in a statement given on their website said that a strategic center of conspiracy was targeted, where Israel was doing something that is not going in favor of Iran. It is also in connection with the growing differences between Iran and Iraq ever since Muqtada Sadr won the election and has started distancing himself from Iran's regime. Since October 2021, since Muqtada Sadr has won the election, the gap between Iran and Iraq have become pretty obvious. All of this happening at the brinks of JCPOA, which is about to reach a conclusion and wherein Iran can get off the hook from the sanctions that it has. I'm joined by two different guests in this segment of my program. My first guest in the program is Ahmed Zaki, who is joining me over the phone, and he's abroad at the moment. So Ahmed, I welcome you to my program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So what exactly has happened in the city of Erbil, and what exactly is the number count of any casualties that might have happened there?
In the city of Erbil, there was a missile strike from Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The Royal Guard of Iran was targeting the Israeli intelligence area of Kurds, Iraqi Kurds. And why they were targeting, there was earlier claim 1 month before that Israeli intelligence, they said we targeted Iranian manufacturing drone manufacturing facility in Iran. So in the retaliation of that, Iran responded to these missiles and they attacked propaganda center of the Israeli intelligence, according to the Iranian officials. Israelis didn't respond about that. There was a casualties. It was not that much casualties, but there is no any foreign casualties over there. It was Iraqi Kurds who have been injured, and a few number of people have been died.
Ahmed Zaki, Israel has not commented on this development. So what do you think is happening this time in Israel? Because Israel is also a lot concerned about the developments between Iran and the rest of the world with regards to JCPOA, and is a bit likely to get off the hook from the sanctions that it is under for quite long now.
There are some political interests behind these attacks. That Israel, they don't want to, Iran should have to be lifted from the sanctions, and Iran is trying to get economic independence, and sanctions should have to be lifted. Even though the Iran nuclear deal has been withdrawn by Americans, and the negotiation was going on in Europe, and Europe was putting a lot of pressure on America that they should have to come back to the negotiation, but American demands were extra demand is that Iran is making long-range missiles, and they are destabilizing the region. And this is one of the examples that Israel was giving to the Americans and Western allies, that Iran should not be trusted. That if we could lift all sanctions on Iran, they will be economically more capable to produce a nuclear weapon. The question here arises is that why this time the attack came. On the side of Iran, they need to receive the attention that we can create this destabilization in the region at any time we want. Number one, and Americans should have to realize that Iran's sanctions is not working at all. If the sanctions of Iran could work, Iranian government should have to be collapsed by this time due to the economic bankruptcy. But it didn't happen. So in terms of that, now Iran is showing some sort of independence and some sort of influence in the region. And if the Americans are not going to come back to the negotiation table to sign again the nuclear deal, that Iran is capable, what Americans were afraid of already.
Not the first time when United States has taken a lenient view. I mean, all United States had to offer was a few words exchange. Normally, this is not how United States respond to the developments in the countries that it has doesn't enjoy a good relationship with. So, what do you think is the main reason for United States to hesitate when it comes to respond to the aggressions made by the Iranian sides?
Even though I didn't hear your voice very clearly due to the signal weakness, but I think
Let
you
me,
said
Ahmed,
that.
let me repeat. I mean, United States has just given a statement saying that it was an outrageous attack against Iraqi sovereignty and a display of violence. Nothing more than words have come from United States that is now negotiating Iran's JCPOA in the final stage. Why do you think United States at the moment is taking a lenient view of this attack by Iran?
That is very clear that Americans are not interested to involve any more conflict in Middle East. Since they left their last troops from Afghanistan, they don't want to involve any more wars or any military intervention in Middle East or any other country. So they are now building up their economic influence in the world because China grows very fast, extremely very fast, that it might take less than 10 years that China will become the global leader of the economy. So by the attention of this, Americans are feeling that they wasted all their time and energy by fighting and imposing the other countries on democratic procedure that people are not even ready of. So this is one of the linear steps that they are taking, that we are not ready to involve any conflict and everything should have to be resolved in diplomatic way. The question is that how much compromise that Iran is going to make for making the agreement, that if Iran is going to show some kind of responsibility, that they are not going to create any destabilization in the region, especially the American allies of Israel and Saudi Arabia, the negotiation table will be very easily to adapt. So Iran have started to negotiate with Saudi Arabia earlier in this year, and the end of the last year, beginning from the last November.
Ladies and gentlemen, I had with me Mr. Ahmed Zaki, who was in Somalia at the moment. He was with us over the phone, and he explained why United States is not acting back aggressively. He told us that between United States and Iran situation has started getting better, but it is Israel that is not comfortable with the situation. And to join me in the studio, I have with me Mr. Nazir Moeed, who is an expert of Middle East and talks a lot about the issues with regard to Iran and Iraq. And I welcome you to my program once again.
Welcome, Shabahat.
So tell us about this act of aggression that has happened. Initially, there were unconfirmed reports, but later on, Iran's military gave a statement on the website saying, yes, we have done it, and they have said that it can be continued if their issues are not settled. So what's your quick take on that?
It looks like it's a revenge from Iran to what happened last Feb as Israel attacked a workshop or a depot of the Iranian drones near a city, Irani city, and that was the statement of Iranian officials, that they attacked place in Erbil which belongs or which contains people of the Mossad, working for the Mossad inside Erbil.
Since you are from Iraq and you have lived almost all of your life there, tell us about this territory, because when I was going through some research for this program, I came to know that neither this is a province nor an independent state. It is called the Kurdish region of Iraq. So help me to understand what is a Kurdish region of Iraq.
Well, Kurdistan, the Iraqi Kurdistan, it have its own region in Iraq. They have their own government and parliament. Even though they are acting under the centralized government in Baghdad, but they have more independency than other areas of Iraq. They have their own federal system, which is not there for other areas in Iraq. It's only for the Kurdish region. So the Kurds, they have their, they have a lot of independent policies, even with foreign policies. They have independent foreign relations, like with the Israelis, with the Americans. Some Kurdish parties, they have direct relations with Israel, as it came in many media.
So the claims made by the Iranian sides are not all in there. There are established relationships between Israel and the Kurdish
it's
region.
very old. You know, Mustafa al-Barzani, father of Masoud Barzani, he visited Israel a few times in between the 60s and 70s of the last century.
All right. So looking back at Iraq, ever since Saddam Hussein was taken down, and then there has been problems with regards to the political system of the country. Do we still find the political system in an entire disarray? Because Muqtada Sadr, who won election back in October, has yet not been able to come up with an entire well-defined political structure for the country.
It's very complicated in Iraq. All the previous governments, they took long time to be shaped. Sometimes it took 6 months and even more than 6 months to establish a government in Iraq. Unfortunately, there are so many parties in Iraq, so many players in the politics. Making a government is not an easy job. And you need a lot of people who support you to make a government in Iraq.
Nazir, let me take Ahmed Zaki back in the program. Ahmed, welcome back to the program, and we are right now discussing the political disarray of Iraq's polity, which has not been able to come up with a government with a broad consensus. And despite the fact that Muqtada Sadr has a majority, still the political equation of the country is not as straightforward as it used to be. So don't you think that the political problems of Iraq have yet not been solved completely?
You are right. It has not been yet resolved. It's not only one issue. There are many factors affecting the Iraqi policy. Number one is that there is a democratic procedure that Iraq have never been experienced before this administration. Since the American intervention came, this is the first time Iraq have experienced a democratic procedure of election. So this is when they realize that the majority can lead the country. And the majority, on the basis of what? Now they divided themselves into a sectarian policy, which is like sectarian policy. Shia is going to lead the country because they are majority in number. So when you mix it, the religion or sectarian policy into the normal political procedure, the division of the country will not be easily to resolve. Number one. Number two is that the Iraqi autonomous region of Kurdistan, they want the Kurdish to be separated from Iraq. So they have autonomous region, and they don't want to involve central political party. So this is one of the major cases that Iraq is facing. On the other side, the economic instability of Iraq, oil theft, corruption, lack of employment of the young generation, all these factors are contributing instability of the politics of the region.
Thank you, Zaki, for bringing this out. Nazir, do you agree that the economic problems of Iraq sit right at the heart of this entire overall picture that doesn't allow Iraq to flourish back as it used to be a flourishing economy back in 90s?
No doubt, economic crises are making the situation in Iraq very difficult because it will increase the corruption in the country. It will not allow people to, elect their representatives freely, and the systems will not be resolved in the near future. There will not be quick solutions to most of the problems which Iraq is facing.
And Zaki, do you think that the problem of Muqtada Sadr's continuous inclination toward an anti-Iran direction is causing more discomfort for Iran? Don't you think this is a major reason why Iran stays uncomfortable in this equation?
Iraq is between a triangle political influence in the region. Number one is that they are linear in one side of Iran because of the Shia majority influence in the region, in the Iraq. And the other side, they are getting a lot of financial support from Saudi Arabia, which they cannot deny or which they cannot reject, which have also another influence. The third influence is that the American presence in the country, which have a direct threat to Iran. So they are between the three enemies, and who cannot come sit together and resolve their issues. So Iraq, even though they have a local instability and local division, still they are also facing the international interests, which make Iraq vulnerable to face all these crises. So take, for example, if American armies are having still bases, which they are still trying to control the Iran influence in the region, and they are targeting like they have targeted previous Iranian commander in Iraq. This type of activities are increasing the vulnerability of Iraq, and Iran is going to respond regardless of their sovereignty. So one country is using their land to attack another foreigners who are in the country, and the other country is using their own land to attack another foreigner in the country. Saudi Arabia is doing same. So they are financing sectarian policies. They are supporting the Sunni extremists. They are supporting those who are against the Iranian influence in Iraq, and vice versa. Iran is doing the same. They are supporting those who are Shia majority, those who are linear to the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and they are financing even the arming the Shia groups who are fighting against the Americans and against the Sunnis. So this is
thank you very much, Ahmed Zaki, for being guest in my program. Your inputs are quite valuable. Lastly, don't you think that the use of force by Iran again to settle a dispute at the time when Europe and the United States are trying to convince themselves that Iran should be put back into the international system, perhaps to replace the oil that they were getting from Russia and to bring the global oil market back in place? Would it not serve as a reminder to the entire world that with more money on the table, it might just get more difficult to deal with Iran?
Well, it's definitely problems with Iran can be resolved. The Americans, they are trying, Biden's cabinet, they are trying to make the deals, the nuclear deals with Iran and settle the things which were disturbed in the time period of Mr. Trump. But the main issue which is related to our program today is everything is being settled in a proxy war in Iraq. And I think mostly the same is happening in Ukraine nowadays, that people are fighting in some other's land. Americans and Europeans, they are not settling their problems with Iran directly, but they are settling it through proxies in Iraq and such countries.
Thank you very much, Nazir, for bringing this out. And ladies and gentlemen, this was a very important point that he has made. And that is that the countries should settle their disputes by talks, by engaging each other with talks, instead of, going into other territories and using the means of violence to settle disputes. And if it doesn't stop, the miseries of the world will not stop here. We'll take a break and join you back with the next segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. Russia and Ukraine are fighting each other. The problem is paramount for European Union and particularly Federal Republic of Germany. Germany is the economic powerhouse of entire European Union region. For the poor countries like Greece, Germany has stood tall as the richer boy in the league of these rich countries and has always taken a lead with matters regarding economic and political problems of European Union. But right now, Russia is one of the major exporters of energy to Germany, and Germany's entire industry is in a way dependent on Russian oil and Russian gas. For now, there is no close replica or there is no close alternate available with Germany. The United States, on the contrary, imports only 8% of its oil from Russia and is in a better position to take Russia off from its trade equation. This has created many problems for Germany, and Germany has therefore always taken a confused posture with regards to the Russian issue. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to this part of my program.
In Ukraine could mark a watershed moment for Europe, as European governments are seemingly divided over the conflict. Europe's economic powerhouse, Germany, has declined to provide Ukraine with weapons, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has emphasized his support for strategic ambiguity. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Germany of according primacy to economy instead of Ukraine's security in an address to the German parliament. Europe's largest economy, Germany, is enduring the heat of Ukraine conflict as inflation, disrupted supply chains, halted Nord Stream 2 project, and the high price of energy are leading to fears of a recession. According to a report released by Kiel Institute for the World Economy, economic turmoil caused by Ukraine crisis is likely to cost Germany a total of around $100 billion in economic output. The monthly indicator of economic sentiment by the Center for European Economic Research plunged 93.6 points to negative 39.3 points for March. Germany had previously opposed the Russian exclusion from SWIFT, partly because it feared a cutoff in Russian gas shipments if Russian energy companies can no longer be paid. Germany imports 55% of its natural gas from Russia, and its deep economic relationship with Russia is decades old that long held back Berlin from sharper criticism of Kremlin.
To join me in this segment of program, our first guest is Osama Rizvi, renowned analyst on energy and economic issues. Osama, I welcome you to my program.
Thank you so much.
And we are talking about Federal Republic of Germany. That is taking the brunt of this war between European Union, the economic war between European Union and NATO allies and Russia. 55% of natural gas, 52% of her coal, and 34% of the mineral oil used by Federal Republic of Germany is being imported from Russia. Your thoughts on it, sir?
Yes, so I have discussed this on your show as well. The problem right now, as you mentioned in your package as well, and to the preface to it as well, that the US wants its allies to do certain things. By allies, I mean the European Union, right? However, the US is not as dependent, or the US will not be affected to the same degree and extent as the allies would if they go for those drastic measures. One of those measures is, of course, sanctioning Russia's oil and gas sector. We all saw that in the anticipation of this, oil prices, Brent, one of the benchmarks, rose to $140, approaching almost its high back in 2008. But then, when only the US sanctioned Russian oil and gas sector and the EU left it alone, oil prices fell back. Why? Because the markets, the speculators were expecting such a drastic step. However, in reality, as you have mentioned yourself, Germany, especially the powerhouse, the economic engine of the European Union, and even other countries, they cannot just seriously afford to take this step. Even before this conflict happened, it's not about this conflict only. Before the conflict, there was a full-fledged energy crisis going on in Europe. Their domestic gas production has fallen. Gas prices were soaring. They were talking to the skies. Oil prices were also high. And in this already disturbed equation, there was another variable, which was this geopolitical conflict, and they simply couldn't do it. So I personally think, on a political and political economic front, I think there is going to be a tussle between the national interest of the US and the national interest of the EU or the economies they're in. And we are seeing it that right now as it happens.
Osama, but Germany doesn't have, I mean, adding further to what you just said, Germany does not have any replacement of this Russian oil. And even if it does, there has to be an entire infrastructure built. And meanwhile, while the infrastructure will be built, there is an ongoing industry. They're one of the leading manufacturers of so many European brands. So what do you think? Why Germany is looking and how Germany is looking essentially toward other countries? And is Germany primarily the reason why so far Russia has not been sanctioned on her gas?
So that is very interesting. IEA, which is a Paris-based agency called International Energy Agency, it, uh, it it produced a report recently, only a week ago, that gave 10 points wherein the European economies can wean themselves off of Russian gas and oil. And the report got a lot of criticism. And let me very briefly tell you why. Because right now, up until the end of 2022, all the gas contracts from Russia, they're being, they're being obliged. Russia is not stopping any gas at this point. And the idea goes that after 2022, you can shift to other means of energy or other resources, other countries using certain things, which is not practical. Let's talk about Qatar. There have been reports, there have been opinions that European Union should turn to Qatar. Qatari minister 2 weeks ago has said this publicly, and I quoted that no single country can replace Russia for EU. All of the Qatar's gas production is already scheduled for the next 2, 3 years to Asia, and they have only left 15% of their production that can go to Europe. Germany gets 150 BCM, billion cubic meters of total gas from Russia. And even if they consider other resources, which is UK, Netherlands, Denmark, even if they consider these, Norway, they can only get up until 70 to 80 BCM. More than half of it will still be missing. You talk about renewable energy. We still know that the cost of renewable energy versus the cost of these fossil fuels or hydrocarbons, there's a huge gap. Right now, as we're speaking, and this is very interesting, the price of coal is at historic highs. Never ever the price of coal has been this high as it is right now. Why? Because Germany, other European countries are rushing, scrambling to get more coal, more conventional means of energy. So this is the reality that we live in, that these countries live in. And all these talks, all these opinions, all these idealistic scenarios, rosy pictures of Germany or the EU shifting to other means of energy, I personally believe it is not possible, at least for the next 50, 60 years. So there is no other way around. And I think they're just intertwined. Both of the countries, both of the regions are intertwined. That is how it is.
Osama, let's watch it from a strategic lens now. So if the cost is as high as you just mentioned, which certainly is because you are quoting stats and quotes from other people, had NATO not calculated the cost of moving eastward, moving towards the territory that was once called USSR, and that President Putin has so many times explicitly mentioned that he believes all of this former USSR to be Russian people disintegrated and spread across different areas of Europe. So, don't you think that the cost of this movement of NATO toward East was probably not rightly calculated?
Yes, I think you have mentioned a very relevant, highly interesting point, and I think more than an hour is not enough for this. The whole idea, the whole idea right now is this debate going on, and there is a very famous professor, and I read him a lot as well, John Mearsheimer, who has recently given an interview to the New Yorker, a very famous and influential magazine, who says the exact same thing. There is a lecture by him back in 2014 when the Crimean annexation took place, and the lecture is titled "Why Ukraine is West's Fault." And he right now still holds the same rationale, the same reasoning. He's not justifying it. Let's be very clear. He's not justifying what Putin is doing is right, but he's giving an explanation of why is he doing it. And this brings back to your question that should not the NATO forces or the allies they would have calculated the cost of these steps. And back in 2008, back in 2004, after the Bucharest conference, when NATO announced that Georgia and Ukraine are welcome to join NATO, what happened after that? 2008, Georgian war. The same thing happened in 2013 when the Ukrainian president wanted to get close to the EU. What happened after that? 2014 Crimean annexation. Same thing in 2021. Zelensky wanted to have more trade with the EU, and forces started to build up, and now see what's going on. So, as much as it is fault of Putin for aggression, it is the same onus, the same burden goes on those powers. That why would you incite the strategic interest of another country? I'm sure we all remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? I'm sure that we all remember, or we all know that if a Latin American country, say Cuba or say Venezuela, wants to adapt Chinese socialism, no, they won't be allowed to do that, even if they really want to. So this is this is just to highlight the divergence between the reality and rhetoric. So I agree that they should have calculated the cost. They should have calculated the interdependence. They should have also calculated that the current context, the global political, economic context, this was going to entail it. It was already catastrophic, and we are sort of facing the music. Everyone.
Osama, taking one step forward, I mean, in the same direction, don't you think that with the increasing gaps between Europe and Russia and this energy that has started to develop between Russia and China for having common enemies and common economic problems, if China starts getting more than what it is getting at the moment in terms of energy supplies from Russia, this will further bring down the cost of manufacturing in China and will make cost of manufacturing in other countries like Japan, like Korea, I mean the South Korea, again in an American bloc, and European Union, in particular Germany, more expensive. That is going to make the tilt of China, things will tilt more in favor of China in the international economic order as well.
Well, I partially agree, and it is highly complicated. If you look at the trade statistics, China's largest trading partner is not Russia and other countries, it is US, right? And right now, even The Economist covered an article, saying that to what extent will China go to aid Russia financially? Because see what happens if China does that. China still wants to be in the global financial system. We're talking about alternative systems. One of them is CIPS, Chinese Interbank Payment System. It is a payment system that is hosted on SWIFT. It is not a different payment system, right? SWIFT is an overarching system that endorses, that uses, that allows different payment systems to be used. So China is still dependent, and China has their own economy. They have 1.34 billion people to take care of. They have to tread a very fine line here. They can help Russia, but that would draw the ire of US. And to remind, the tariffs from the trade war still holds. There haven't been any changes in that. So as much as we're talking about yuan being the next global currency, as much as we're talking about the change of global economic order and dollar falling down, It is not that simple. It is not that easy, and it is not going to be that quick at all. There are no winners in this because each and every economy, and especially US and China, are intricately intertwined. They both need each other. So, yeah, it's highly complicated.
Thank you very much, Osama Rizvi, for being guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Osama Rizvi. It's always a luxury to have him in our program. And what he just mentioned is an entirely different picture than what apparently looks on the surface. Categorically, he mentioned that there are no winners in this war, and the financial problems of Germany remains to be one of the major problems for the European Union as well as the entire Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now have the privilege of having another speaker in my program. He is Mr. Clint Ehrlich. He is a strategic expert based in Washington, D.C., former visiting researcher at MGIMO University of Moscow. And I welcome Mr. Clint, you to my program. And what we are discussing today is the worries of Federal Republic of Germany with the cost of war increasing more than expected. What are your quick thoughts on it, sir?
The European Union would have severe consequences, especially for Germany. Countries like France still have significant nuclear power production capability, which offsets the loss of Russian gas. But Germany, on the other hand, due to the rise in power of the Green Party in its domestic politics, has significantly reduced its nuclear production capabilities. As a result, it's heavily dependent on Russian gas. And if Russia cuts off the flow of that gas, then Germany simply doesn't have any immediately available substitutes. It could turn to the United States for imports of liquefied natural gas on tankers. The problem is that those need specialized terminals to be built because that gas has to be stored at high pressure and low temperatures. And so in order to build those replacements, it would take at least 2 years, something that can't address the immediate crisis.
Do you think this to be primarily the reason why Germany's political stance have enormously changed or have kept changing throughout this 3 weeks long war so far? We have seen Germany changing the position and has primarily been a major force of reluctance for putting more financial pressure on Russia.
Germany has changed its position in this conflict so many times, and it has modified so many red lines because it's caught in a tension between its historical attitude after World War II and the current security situation. The legacy of Germany's involvement in World War II, the rise of the Nazi Party, has been an ambition among the German people to not be involved in great power politics. However, the German elite and the German national security establishment has wanted to be more aligned with the West. And so that tension has created a constant push and pull within Germany. And now what we're seeing is that as Russia has escalated the situation and raised the stakes with its actions in Ukraine, Germany has been willing to go closer and closer to the pressure from the United States and its NATO allies to be more assertive and to stray away from the conservative approach that it previously had in not confronting Russia. And so there's really a shift where previously Germany was almost in some ways like a Russian proxy within NATO and the European Union, and now it sees that alignment with Russia as untenable, and it's being forced to divest itself of the policy positions that kept it in alignment with Russia.
But if that is the case, Clint, why do you believe Germany has allowed United States to take a lead in this entire conflict? It is US that is calling the shots, and it's Germany that's paying the price.
Well, that's a great question to ask to Germany's leaders. The direct answer is that Germans will pay a greater price because Germans have more on the line. The United States, if it wanted to, could simply withdraw from Europe, and its security would be guaranteed by the natural borders provided by the oceans and the fact that America does not have enemies either to the north or the south. And so when the United States is engaged in Europe, it's ultimately on some level doing a favor to the European countries whose security is threatened. And if those European countries, including Germany, want to continue to exist under the US security umbrella, then it's likely that their citizens are going to be pressured to pay more of a price than Americans have been. For a long time, America's spending, as measured by the percentage of GDP spent on defense, has been much higher than Europe. And now, as the threat from Russia, at least the perceived threat, increases, we're seeing a realignment where European countries are going to be expected to pay their fair share, something that Donald Trump pushed for, but that ironically it seems will actually happen now under the Biden administration due to the choices made by Vladimir Putin.
Your point is well taken, Mr. Clint, but then one more important question that I would want to ask you is that why Germany has announced expanding its military budget to another $100 billion, 100 billion euros. Do you think that Germany is actually foreseeing an invasion or an all-out war? What else can be the reason for adding into the military expenditure at this very particular point when Germany's economy is already in great crisis?
No, Germany doesn't feel a real threat of war entering her borders. It's important to keep the geography in mind. For Russia to attack Germany, it would have to go through Poland. And given the failures that we've seen to some extent with Russia's military in Ukraine, it's highly unlikely now, less likely, frankly, than before the invasion, that Russia would attempt to mount any sort of operation into Poland or into other NATO states. But it's important to keep in mind the difference between the public perception of the threat and the reality of the threat. And so even though there's a low likelihood that Russia would actually undertake these operations, there's growing concern among the German public about that risk. And so Germany's national security establishment for a long time has been pushing for rearmament. The defense industry has wanted the government to spend more on its wares. And so now there's this window of opportunity where the German public are more open to that kind of shift. They're more open to increased spending. And so we see German politicians seizing the moment and pushing to increase defense spending because it's something that is popular domestically, even if it doesn't address a real threat from Russia to Germany.
Thank you very much, Clint Adlich, for being a guest in my program from Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Mr. Clint Adlich from Washington, D.C. And he made some very pertinent points in this program. One of which is that despite the fact that Germany does not see chances of an all-out invasion, it has decided to further strengthen its military muscle. Another important thing is that while Germany's economy is under pressure, there are many interdependent variables at play in this entire economic war and which cannot be anticipated, which fallout cannot be anticipated. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.